filmmakers that would immediately purchase one of these, but suppose you could push that button. What would it achieve? Well, you could take movies like Interstellar, you could see where there's star fields where you'd be able to have an inky black that's not really so easy to reproduce today, and very bright, all in one scene, and that can make you feel like you're much closer to reality. Or Ender's Game, where you have similar things using these very inky blacks. And you don't have to go to space to enjoy blacks. You could think about emulations of real life here in Into the Wood, where maybe the filmmaker wants you to see a little bit more of the creepy detail inside that shadow area. And one of the good conversations I had with a filmmaker at the HPA Tech Retreat was, well, sometimes filmmakers don't want to distract the viewer into those areas, and that's perfectly valid. It becomes an artistic choice, but high dynamic range would allow you to see more that is appropriate for the storytelling. So the solution is really simple. You need brighter highlights and blacker blacks. Thank you very much for your attention. No, I'm just kidding. I have a few more slides. I thought I would take this one at a time. Brighter highlights? Let's see, what can we do there? Well, one thing is, buy a laser projector. Heck, there's one right back here in the back of the room we'll be seeing over the weekend. Laser projectors, because of the nature of the semiconductor emitters, could put out far greater light than the restraints of xenon short arc lamps. We're talking 2 times, maybe even 3 times the light output. Makes a big difference. Not only that, but they don't degrade between lamp changes. So what I see this today is going to be the same next month, is going to be the same a year from now. And that gives me a consistent output of high brightness. It's also long life, higher efficiency. So laser projectors go a long way, but I think that Michael and Keith before me also showed another thing that you could do, which is use some of the wonderful advancements in screen technology that are coming to market and have over the last 5 years. Current screen manufacturing involves basically spraying surfaces over a substrate such as vinyl, but in the future you'll see screens that are made in entirely different methods, in which there is no spray, but rather the surface is fully engineered, in this case using a mandrel that embosses a plastic sheet with a very specific pattern to create the diffusion of the images exactly where you want it, and that's coated with an aluminum reflective coating, but it's not sprayed on, it's vaporized with the deposition process. It gives you extremely tight control. In fact, you're looking at one here. This is called the Real D Ultimate Screen. We'll be talking a little bit about it more tomorrow. But this, I think, holds part of the future in how you can get better brightness and uniformity across the screens. It's not to market yet, but we think this is going to make big improvements. So that brings us to blacks. As we've heard, getting blacker blacks is one of the most important points that we need to be able to consider. And from an artistic standpoint, many people have said, not just in cinematography, but in photography and fine arts and visual arts of all sorts, that you need really to get that darkest dark before you can enjoy the whites. It's the absence of light that makes the light stand out. Okay, but from a technical standpoint, what do you do? There are several ways that, several influences on the blacks that you're dependent upon in a projection environment. I'll list the main 4. First of all is the projector black state. When you fade to black, did it really go all the way to black? That's typically characterized as the sequential contrast ratio. And when people talk about projectors contrast, that's typically what they're saying. It's a 2,000 to 1 contrast ratio. That means sequential. Secondly, though, is the veiling glare caused by the projector lens with other contributing factors such as sport glass. There's also the ambient light in the auditorium. Right now I'm looking at a number of exit signs and light leakage and people with their little mobile devices putting light into the room, and it has some effect. Finally, the contrast ratio of the auditorium itself. That is, how much light reflects back off the people onto the screen. So let's talk about these one at a time. So sequential contrast is perhaps the best known, and it's based almost exclusively on what's known as the projector dark state luminance, which is just like it sounds. You fade to black. Is there any light coming out of the projector? Because there shouldn't be. But in real life, that's extremely difficult to implement. On the right, we're seeing a drawing of an example of DLP technology. It was just 3 pixels. On the very bottom, we're showing those 3 pixels. The 2 on the ends are supposed to be white, and the one in the middle is supposed to be black. And that's why the mirrors are deformed in the appropriate position. The black pixel in the middle sheds its light in a different direction off the screen into a light absorber, which you see in the far right of the screen. However, a little bit of light sneaks through, and that's what's causing that imperfect contrast ratio from a sequential standpoint. Typically, you're going to see projectors today in the range of 1,500 to 1, sometimes 2,000 to 1. But that's sort of what the limit is, and that's one of the things you want to work on if you need to get more dynamic range. Veiling glare, in the back you're seeing the imager. It goes through the lens with the light. There's a highlight where that moon is, but that highlight, and in fact all the other photons, will also bounce off optical surfaces within the lens and show up where they shouldn't on the screen image. So you're seeing the moon kind of showing up as a veiling glare around the other area of the image. It's not quite that concise because the light bounces off many, many elements within the lens. And often this is in the range of 1,600 to 1. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because maybe that's an area that we could do some improvements. It's very tightly coupled with what's called modulation transform function. If anybody here has been taught by Larry Thorpe, you probably are experts on this, but I'll do a quick reminder. If you were to take a picture of an image that looks something like that, where you had a number of black and white transitions that got closer and closer together, you would expect to have an electronic representation kind of like that. It goes up, in this case, to 255 samples when it's white, and it goes down to 0 when it's black. Now, in real life, you end up with something more like that, where the transitions are not perfect because of optical imperfections in the lens. And as you get to higher and higher frequencies, it diminishes the ability to get all the way up to your peak value. That is called the modulation transform function, and it's probably the most useful and well-used figure of merit for optical lenses. So we looked at some lenses and wanted to see how they hold up. Here we're looking at the MTF characteristics of the DLP lens on that chart at the right. And as you can see, there's two little lines that are a little bit difficult to make out. So we just made a big blue line there that says that 50% of modulation transfer of MTF is at 50 line pairs per millimeter. And that has to do with the spatial resolution of the image on the screen. If you're looking at very low resolution images and very big blocky things, then you're going to get better MTF. If you're looking at tiny little objects, star fields for instance, it's going to go way down to the right. That's from a current MTF projector lens done with actual testing done by one of my colleagues here in the room, Miller Sharp, that did a great job at measuring these. I told Miller that many people believe film lenses have better contrast ratio and performance. So we happen to have access to a 70 millimeter film lens, took MTF measurements of that. And actually it wasn't quite as good as the state-of-the-art DLP. In this case, we're looking at 50% MTF at 25 line pairs per millimeter. There's one other example we had in the shop, because this is a lens that RealD makes. It's called the GS lens for short throw large screens, where we have to have two different projector lenses for left and right eye. And in this case, we're able to get up to 85 line pairs per millimeter for the 50% point. So that's sort of the typical range, but how does that relate to contrast ratio? Well, you could do it by taking the ANSI contrast chart. And this is representing, remember I was talking about black and white transitions? So here's a bunch of them. You might note across the top and up and down, I'm looking at black, white, black, white. That's 4 lines or 2 transitions. So I could put that into a little formula, and across the top there I'm saying, well, there's my MTF chart, and if I have an ANSI that has 4 vertical, 4 horizontal, and then I measure my DLP chip, and it's 31 millimeters, blah, blah, blah. What I do is come up with, I'm way under 1 line pair per millimeter. So I'm at the very sweet spot, the best possible with my MTF curve with the ANSI chart, and I can do the same thing for the 70 millimeter. So what this is saying is that when you're doing a typical ANSI contrast test with low frequency black to white transitions, I'm optimizing my MTF. If I tried to do this test with little tiny dots of a star field, there would be much worse contrast ratio because I'm down that MTF curve. But I could do the math, and there's the formulas for it for those who are interested. But in this example, with that ANSI chart showing about 99.85 MTF, just under 100, I'm showing 1,300 to 1 contrast ratio. So that pretty much matches what I showed you before. But we didn't stop there. We actually went out and measured veiling glare contrast from actual field tests. These are tests that were conducted at 8 premium large format auditoriums throughout North America. I can't say who they were. But I put the little 1,300 line there as a reference point, and you can see there's quite a bit of variation. Some were about 1,800, some of them were much worse than that. Some of that has to do with how clean the lens was, perhaps, and other factors. But that gives us sort of a reference point in that regard. I'm going to move on to number 3 on my list of things that we need to worry about. And I hear this one expressing a lot of concern. All auditoriums have exit row lighting for safety. They have exit signs. They have other lights. They also have cell phones. They have light that are shining onto the screen. Well, this would certainly wash out some of the black levels. And some of my conversations at the HPA conference was, well, how much is that an issue? So we went out to find out. And what we did is measurements of the effect of ambient light on contrast ratio, especially in the blacks. And in this case, our white reference was the test chart. We're using a test chart with black and white squares with an 18% average luminance. For black, we said, we're just going to shut off the projector altogether. We're going to douse the projector so that only light in the room should be totally black. If there's any light, it's light leaking under the door and its exit signs. And this is what we came up with. In the center of the screen, 16,000 to 1. Over 16,000 to 1 contrast ratio, based on the exit signs reflecting off the screen. Now, it wasn't quite as good in the corners. You can see 10,000 in the upper right and 4,500 to 1 in the lower left. Still not bad, but that kind of got us wondering what was causing that. And one of the issues is that in that particular auditorium, we were looking at this sequential contrast ratio. The image was not uniform. It was darker on the left, brighter on the right. So that affected my measurement of the sequential. And remember, the difference here is sequential contrast is the light from the projector on with white, off with black, and it never gets all the way to black. The ambient light, I doused the projector altogether, so there wasn't anything coming out, and I still had some light on the screen. Now, we also found one case of a screen here. This is called radiant imaging photography. It's not really those colors, it's false colors. But what you're showing is the contrast ratio, and it's getting down to that purple in the lower left, about 425 to 1 of ambient light contrast ratio. Guess where the exit sign was? You're right, that was it. So there's an area where this one could be greatly improved. But even where the exit sign wasn't hitting, I was still in that 1,200 to 1 range. All right, so that's the ambient light. Let's talk about the final one, room contrast ratio. Okay, so here's an auditorium, typical, and I shine pretty pictures onto the screen. Sometimes there might be a highlight, some strong light that hits the screen, and of course, that's reflecting back